Welcome to Deep Dive. In this episode, we talk about the hidden universe. From the book, The Hidden Universe, an investigation into non-human intelligences by Anthony Peake. I've actually started reading the book after listening to this deep dive, and I see myself pointing out several items in the future LL portions of the podcast.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're venturing into a truly fascinating and potentially paradigm-shifting subject, non-human intelligences. Our guide for this exploration is Anthony Peake's book, The Hidden Universe, an investigation into non-human intelligences.
Yeah.
Think of this as your express ticket to becoming, pretty well versed in a wild topic. It's packed with surprising connections and key insights, but hopefully without overwhelming you.
Exactly. Peake has woven together, historical accounts, cultural beliefs, and those often ignored experiences in altered states of consciousness. He builds a really compelling perspective.
Yeah.
Our goal today is really to distill the most important nuggets from his investigation and see what broader understanding we can maybe gain from it.
Okay, so for a bit of background on our author, Anthony Peake, he's spent a lot of time exploring the intricacies of altered states of consciousness.
Right, that's his field.
He's also written The Infinite Mind Field and Opening the Doors of Consciousness, so this is definitely his territory. It's also worth mentioning The Hidden Universe is dedicated to the memory of his mother.
Oh, interesting.
Which perhaps adds a deeply personal layer to his search for realities beyond the everyday.
Yeah, that personal connection could very well be the engine driving his exploration into what might lie beyond our usual way of seeing things. Peake kicks off his book by sharing his own experience with something called the hypnagogic light experience, or Lucia.
Lucia, right.
And this event really shook the foundations of his understanding of reality.
Absolutely. He describes how Lucia revealed a perceptual world that felt like constantly present, yet completely invisible during our normal waking hours. This experience pushed him to reconsider the idea that reality is simply either consensual, what we all agree is real, or just a hallucination, just a trick our minds play on us.
Right, that simple binary.
He realized the picture was far more intricate than that.
And this leads him down the path of exploring entheogens. Now, this is a key term he introduces, and he makes a clear distinction between it and the more common term, psychedelic.
Yeah, that's important.
What's the core difference he's highlighting there?
Okay, let's try and unpack that nuance a bit. The term psychedelic, which, came into use earlier, basically means mind manifesting, suggesting these substances primarily create altered states within our own minds. But Peake, following others, makes a case for entheogen as maybe a more accurate descriptor.
Okay.
It comes from Greek and essentially means becoming divine within, or maybe that which causes God to be inside us.
Right.
The crucial difference is the implication that these substances, things like mescaline, psilocybin, even DMT, might actually provide some form of access to other realities.
Interesting.
Almost like bypassing the brain's usual filtering mechanisms of perception.
It was not just about internal mental shifts, but potentially about opening doors to something external.
Potentially, yeah.
And what's fascinating is that Peake points out this state of enthusiasm, this feeling of being full of the God, isn't limited to just taking substances.
That's right. He emphasizes how certain powerful practices, like really immersive rhythmic dancing and drumming, can also induce these entheos states.
Wow.
It's like these activities can also, in their own way, potentially open similar doors of perception without any chemical aids.
So with that groundwork laid, we arrive at the central question that really fuels Peake's investigation. Is what we call consensual reality the only one there is?
Right.
Or could there be multiple layers of reality, perhaps even populated by non-human entities? And this is where his connection with the artist Myron Dial takes on real significance.
This is where it gets really interesting. Dial, whose own vivid experiences shaped his perspective, deeply resonated with Peake's earlier idea of the daemon eidolon dyad.
Oh yes, the dyad.
This is Peake's model suggesting that each of us has two facets of consciousness. There's the everyday eidolon, which is anchored in linear time, and our shared consensual reality.
Our day-to-day self.
And then the demon, a more timeless, perhaps even immortal aspect of ourselves that observes and maybe guides the eidolon.
And Dial's own encounters seem to sort of confirm this model for him, right? With his own demon, Charon, playing an active role in his life and art.
Exactly.
This very personal validation then serves as a springboard for Peake's broader exploration of the widespread reports of non-human intelligences that we find, throughout history and across different cultures.
Exactly. And while Peake acknowledges the possibility that these beings could be mind-created, a product of our own consciousness,
Right.
he leaves us with a really provocative philosophical question. Does the fact that they might be mind-created necessarily mean they don't have some form of objective existence?
That's a deep one.
It's a truly fascinating starting point as we delve into the different categories of these reported entities.
Okay, let's dive into those categories now. Peake outlines several key types of non-human intelligences in his book. The first he tackles are those associated with the occult. What's the defining characteristic of these entities?
Okay, occult entities, or what he often refers to as egregorials in a broader sense.
Huh.
These are specifically those that are brought into being or interacted with through magical practices, or magic, as Aleister Crowley famously spelled it.
Right, with a K.
The intent behind these practices is often to gain knowledge or, to exert some kind of influence or control.
Got it. Then we have religious egregorials. These are perhaps more familiar to many in a traditional sense. How does Peake define them within his framework?
So these are the entities that tend to manifest within the context of religious beliefs. Think of angels, the Virgin Mary, and various apparitions, or different deities within pantheons. Peake's suggestion here is that these could be non-human entities that are essentially adopting forms that resonate within specific cultural or religious belief systems.
Interesting.
So the underlying entity might be something else, but it appears in a way that people within that belief system can understand and relate to.
Interesting. So the outward appearance might be shaped by culture, but the entity itself, maybe something more fundamental.
Perhaps.
The next category is egregorials of mind power. This one sounds particularly intriguing.
Yeah, this is where the power of collective human thought really comes into play. Peake proposes that these entities are essentially brought into existence within what he calls the kenoma.
Kilma.
Think of this as the seemingly empty space of our perceived reality. They're brought in through the focused intention and shared thinking of groups of people.
So it's almost like a thought form that, through enough collective energy, gains a degree of independence.
That's the idea, almost like a shared imaginary friend that becomes a bit more real, maybe.
Okay. And then we have spirits, those often accessed through mediumship. How do they fit into Peake's model?
Well, traditionally, these are seen as the spirits of the deceased, right?
Right.
However, Peake draws a potential link between these and those egregorials of mind power. He suggests that the entities contacted by mediums might, in some instances, be creations of collective thought, perhaps fueled by grief or longing, rather than solely the lingering consciousness of individuals who have passed on.
So there's a potential overlap and fluidity between these categories.
Exactly. It's not always clear-cut.
Now, to make this a bit more tangible, Peake includes some really interesting personal anecdotes in his book. His mother's UFO sighting is quite remarkable. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, it's a very down-to-earth, almost casual account. She and her sister witnessed what she described as a distinct circle of smoke, with a solid disc-shaped object right in the middle of it, complete with flashing lights. She said it spun silently for a while and then just vanished.
Yeah, just like that.
What makes it particularly compelling is her initially matter-of-fact way of describing it, and the fact that she wasn't someone, deeply invested in UFO theories or anyone.
Well, not looking for it. And then, not long after, there's a more unsettling encounter.
Yes. Just a few days later, she woke up to find her bedroom door slightly open.
Oh, yeah.
And saw these long, thin fingers followed by a large head peering into the room.
Yikes.
She described this creature looking around, then making eye contact with her before quickly retreating. It left her deeply frightened, with a real sense of her personal space and safety being violated.
I can imagine.
It's a very direct, personal example of an encounter with something truly out of the ordinary.
That interplay between personal stories and these theoretical frameworks is really a hallmark of Peake's writing, isn't it?
It really is.
He then moves into some pretty deep philosophical considerations, starting with the classic debate between materialist reductionism and idealism.
Okay, this is where we start to get into the really fundamental nature of reality itself. Materialist reductionism, at its core, argues that the physical world is all that exists, and everything, including our consciousness, ultimately arises from matter.
The standard view for a long time.
Right. Peake uses Dr. Samuel Johnson's famous refutation of Bishop Berkeley, kicking a stone to prove its reality as a classic illustration of this viewpoint.
Yeah, I refute it thus.
Exactly. The idea is if it's solid enough to kick, it must be real and independent of our minds.
But as Peake astutely points out, Johnson's rather forceful gesture doesn't really hold up when we consider our modern scientific understanding.
Yeah.
Especially when we look at matter at the atomic level.
Exactly. He reminds us that atoms are overwhelmingly empty space.
There's absolutely nothing.
And even the fundamental particles, like electrons, are essentially point particles with no physical size. So what exactly was Johnson kicking?
Good question.
And even more profoundly, within his own equally empty brain, where did the consciousness that felt the impact reside? It forces us to ask some really deep questions about the nature and location of our own awareness.
This line of questioning naturally leads into Jean Baudrillard's concept of the desert of the real, which Peake adopts and refers to as the kenoma.
Right, the kenoma.
What's the significance of this idea when we're talking about non-human intelligences?
Well, the desert of the real essentially suggests that what we perceive as a solid, objective, independently existing world might actually be a kind of mind-created illusion, or at least a very specific interpretation of something more fundamental. Peake builds on this, proposing that the collective consciousness of all observing beings might be what collapses quantum possibilities into the seemingly fixed sensorial realm that we experience.
And this sensorial realm, this world we perceive, has boundaries, almost like a frontier. Peake calls this liminal space the egregorial realm,
Right.
drawing inspiration from the Gnostic concept of horos, which means a boundary or limit.
Precisely. This egregorial realm acts as a kind of borderland where inhabitants of what the Gnostics called the pleroma,
The pleroma, the fullness.
which they considered the realm of true ultimate reality, where inhabitants of the pleroma can potentially enter the kenoma, our perceived world. Peake's argument is that independently motivated entities might be able to utilize our own minds as a kind of bridge or gateway between these realms.
Okay, shifting gears now. From philosophy to history, Peake explores how ancient civilizations and even prehistoric cultures have depicted their encounters with the unusual. He starts by looking at cave paintings.
Right. These earliest forms of visual communication, dating back tens of thousands of years, clearly show animals and human figures. Standard stuff.
Yeah.
But then you stumble upon some truly enigmatic images, like those found in Chhattisgarh, India. There you have depictions of animals like kangaroos and giraffes.
Which are not natives there at all.
Not at all. Alongside humanoid figures that appear to be in some kind of protective suits, and even strange human-fish hybrids.
Wow.
It really makes you wonder what our ancient ancestors actually saw and why they chose to portray these particular things.
It certainly forces us to reconsider our assumptions about what early humans understood and experienced. From there, Peake delves into the shamanic universe model, which is found in many indigenous cultures.
Yeah, the shamanic worldview of the cosmos typically involves a layered structure, often with three main levels: the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. Peake draws a fascinating parallel between our everyday world, the kenoma, and the shamanic middle world. He suggests that the middle world is a kind of non-ordinary, more fluid counterpart to our perceived reality.
Okay.
This is the realm where shamans often operate in their trances and where encounters with egregorials and the hidden folk, fairies, elves, other nature spirits are traditionally said to occur.
Right. And interestingly, a common thread in shamanic beliefs is that these middle world entities can sometimes feed off the life force or energy of living beings.
That's a recurring theme, yes. It's a bit unsettling.
Yeah. And the initiation practices that shamans undergo in various cultures to gain access to these realms are often quite intense, involving profound altered states.
Absolutely. Raciel Aid's accounts of symbolic dismemberment during shamanic journeys are particularly striking and found across diverse cultures.
Right, that dismemberment theme.
Then you have traditions like the Australian Aboriginal belief in initiation by the Irantania spirit entities from the Dreamtime, which can involve practices like tongue piercing in sacred caves.
Wow.
And the Kogi Mamas of Colombia, who spend long periods of isolation and darkness to develop their senses attuned to the realm of Aluna. Another compelling example of seeking access to non-ordinary perception.
This recurring theme of encountering non-human entities continues as Peake explores the ancient deities and beings found in the mythologies of early civilizations. He begins with the Sumerian accounts, some of the oldest written stories we have.
The Sumerians, through their intricate cuneiform writings, left behind detailed accounts of interactions with beings they called the Anunnaki, which translates roughly to those who from heaven to earth came. They credited these entities with imparting crucial knowledge and advancements to their civilization.
So like culture bringers.
Kind of, yeah. The Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, even describes a war in the celestial realms and the eventual banishment of some of the Anunnaki. Within this narrative, we also find mention of the Igigi, another group often translated as Watchers, who remained in the upper heavens.
Ah, the Watchers.
Yeah.
That concept then resurfaces in Jewish traditions, taking on a somewhat different connotation.
Yes, the Book of Enoch, which isn't in the standard Bible, but is an important ancient Jewish text.
Right, non-canonical.
It elaborates on the story of the Watchers, figures like Azazel and Simjaza. It describes their descent to earth, their forbidden unions with human women, which produced the Nephilim,
The giants.
and their subsequent fall from grace and transformation into malevolent spirits seeking revenge on humanity. It's a powerful narrative of heavenly beings directly interacting with and significantly influencing human affairs, often with rather negative consequences.
The ancient Egyptian creation myth also presents some intriguing parallels to these other accounts.
We see a complex creation story involving a pantheon of entities like Timu, Shu, Tefnut, and the pivotal union of Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky, which gives rise to Osiris, Isis, and their siblings.
Right, the classic figures.
And the well-known myth of Osiris's violent dismemberment and subsequent miraculous reconstitution by Isis. It strongly echoes that shamanic theme of dismemberment and rebirth we discussed earlier.
Ah, good connection.
Suggesting a deeper cross-cultural symbolic resonance there.
Moving westward to Greek mythology, we find another echo of these celestial conflicts in the story of the Titans.
The Titans, who are the offspring of Gaia, Earth, and Uranus, Sky, famously rebelled against their father, Uranus.
Right.
As punishment for their defiance, they were eventually expelled from the heavens and banished to the underworld, often depicted as the dark abyss of Tartarus.
So another fall from grace story.
Exactly. It mirrors the Sumerian and Jewish accounts of heavenly beings falling or being cast down. Interestingly, the Greek word tetanos actually means gray.
Oh, great.
Like
That's
that.
interesting, given later phenomena.
A subtle detail, yeah.
Yeah.
Greek mythology also features nocturnal beings like Inanna, who has Sumerian roots, and the fearsome Lamia, figures associated with night terrors and almost vampiric qualities.
The Gnostic traditions offered a rather unique and often contrasting perspective on these heavenly figures and the nature of creation itself.
Yeah, the Gnostics viewed the god of the Old Testament, whom they call the Demiurge, as a lesser, flawed deity who created an imperfect physical universe.
So, not the ultimate god.
No. This imperfect creation was seen as a pale imitation of the true spiritual reality of Platonic forms, ruled by a higher, more transcendent true god. This introduces the idea of a fundamentally flawed or deceptive reality and a hidden, more authentic one that lies beyond our everyday perception.
The origins of Islam also feature a significant and transformative encounter within a cave setting.
The Prophet Muhammad's initial visitation in a north-facing cave, the profound and voiceless communications he received, and the accompanying distinct bell-like sound are foundational elements of Islamic tradition.
Right.
Islamic teachings also incorporate the concept of the Watchers, Harut, Marut, and a figure often identified with Azazel before his fall,
Right.
and the Jinn, often translated as the Hidden Ones.
The jinn, right.
The Jinn are considered to be God's other people, existing in a liminal space between the spiritual and physical realms, frequently associated with imagery of snakes or reptiles, and sometimes with ghostly phenomena.
Interesting.
Peake draws a really intriguing line connecting these figures, the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the Jinn, suggesting a possible underlying continuity across these traditions.
Celtic traditions offer another incredibly rich and enduring tapestry of beliefs in non-human entities that inhabit a realm often overlapping with our own.
Oh, yeah. Robert Kirk's 17th century work, The Secret Commonwealth, provides a fascinating and detailed survey of Scottish fairy folk, often referred to as the Erstdwellers, or Fiend,
The fiend, yeah.
who are believed to inhabit subterranean abodes within fairy hills or howes. Fairyland itself was sometimes linked to a pre-Christian concept of Hades or the afterlife. The idea of being abducted into fairyland as a punishment for revealing secrets underscores the perceived power and otherness of these beings.
Interesting. Tell their secrets.
Right. Accounts of Celtic egregorials suggest that glimpses of a higher reality might be attainable through altered states, with these entities potentially possessing an independent existence. Their cosmological models often described overlapping Earth, mid, and heaven worlds, which strongly echoes the shamanic worldview.
More overlaps.
And descriptions of unusual fairy creatures, such as one with glistening luminosity and dark cavernous eyes, bear a striking resemblance to aspects of Peake's mother's later encounter.
Wow, that's specific.
We even have accounts of individuals like John Slay who believed he simultaneously existed in two planes of reality and sought to use mescaline in an attempt to further open his doors of perception to these other realms.
It's quite remarkable to see how these core themes and even specific descriptive details seem to echo across such vastly different cultures and immense spans of time.
It really is.
Peake also examines more modern encounters that seem to have striking parallels with these traditional beliefs.
We do see modern reports that strongly resonate with these ancient ideas. For instance, the PSI report of auditory hallucinations with voices saying, "Don't you see us? We're all around you,"
Creepy.
is eerily reminiscent of Peake's mother's experience of hearing singing children. Another modern account describes a vivid visual hallucination of a brown cloth with clover leaves inexplicably overlaying everyday reality, along with the appearance of tall ladies with elaborate hairstyles.
Just appearing.
Suggesting a fleeting glimpse into another kind of world. Then there's Phil's encounter with gray shadows that he intuitively identified as sylphs, the mythological spirits of the air,
Self-straight.
which finds corroboration in the detailed clairvoyant descriptions of similar entities by Jeffrey Hudson.
Okay. This leads us into Peake's discussion of the occult and the entities that are intentionally evoked through specific practices.
Right. Occult, meaning hidden knowledge, encompasses a range of practices aimed at understanding and potentially influencing the natural world and interacting with non-human entities. Western occultism draws heavily from ancient Hellenistic and Jewish mystical traditions.
Yeah, deep roots.
Medieval magic saw the development of grimoires, like the Book of Abramelin, which outlines a detailed process for achieving union with one's holy guardian angel.
DHGA, yeah.
Philosophers like Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa also wrote extensively about magic, emphasizing the role of the magician in working with spiritual beings.
The figure of John Dee and his practice of Enochian magic is central to this discussion of intentional evocation.
Oh, Dee's fascinating. A brilliant Renaissance scholar with a deep interest in the apocryphal Book of Enoch. He collaborated extensively with the scryer Edward Kelly.
Kelly the Scryer, right.
Kelly claimed to be able to see angels in crystals, including Uriel, one of the Watchers. During their sessions, they purportedly encountered various entities, such as King Camera and El. El even spoke in a language taught in paradise, which they recorded, Sogalcamaiketh, and promised to reveal the lost Book of Enoch in its original language.
Wow.
The true nature of Kelly's abilities and motivations, whether he was a genuine medium or, a skilled deceiver, remains a subject of debate.
Yeah, the big question with Kelly.
It adds to the enduring mystery of their work.
The controversial figure of Aleister Crowley also features prominently in this section on occult practices.
Crowley, yeah. He was deeply influenced by the Book of Abramelin and Dee's Enochian magic. His own attempts to evoke his holy guardian angel, the mystical experiences that led to the writing of the Book of the Law, and his broader philosophy of magic are all discussed.
Right.
He even claimed to have successfully evoked the powerful demon Choronzon using Enochian language and to have encountered a significant entity known as Lamb.
Lamb, the gray-like figure.
Yes.
The intriguing concept of a tulpa, a thought form brought into tangible existence through focused intention, is also explored within this context.
Alexandra David Neal, the famous explorer of Tibet, famously wrote about her experiences creating a tulpa, a mental construct that she claimed seemed to develop a degree of independence.
Like it got away from her.
A bit, yeah. This account illustrates the potential power of intensely focused intention. Bram Murray's own belief in magician-created non-physical entities further underscores the idea that focused thought can have effects beyond our immediate understanding.
Okay. Next, Peake delves into the fascinating phenomenon of religious egregorials by examining some well-known case studies.
The famous apparition at Lourdes, where the young Bernadette Soubirous had repeated encounters with the White Lady in the grotto, is a key example.
Lourdes is right.
Peake recounts the descriptions of the entity, Bernadette's trance-like states during the visions, and the growing numbers of people who witnessed these events. It's also interesting to note that there were prior, less well-known reports of unusual phenomena in the same location.
Pattern there. The visions reported at Fatima in Portugal are another incredibly significant and well-documented case.
The encounters of Lucia dos Santos and her younger cousins, Jacinta and Francisco Marto, with a little woman from heaven near the Cova da Iria cave are discussed in detail.
Fatima.
The accounts of a sphere of light, the promised reappearances, the strange buzzing sounds and explosions, the appearance of a white cloud, various light phenomena, and the remarkable movement of a globe of light witnessed by tens of thousands of people,
Including skeptics.
including skeptical journalists and priests, are all part of this compelling historical event. The fact that these events, like the one at Lourdes, also occurred at or near a cave is a recurring detail that Peake highlights.
Caves again. Moving on, Peake shifts his focus to entities of mind power, beginning with the intriguing case of the Philip experiment.
This is a truly fascinating example. The Toronto Society for Psychical Research seemingly managed to bring a completely fictitious entity, a made-up ghost named Philip Aylesford, into being.
They just invented him.
Completely invented him. Through focused group meditation and table rapping, the researchers found that playful engagement, repetitive singing, and what they termed a childlike creativity seemed to be key in facilitating these phenomena,
Interesting.
potentially linking to Michael Hollowell's concept of non-corporeal companions or imaginary friends.
Yeah.
Richard Cavendish's argument that entities evoked by magic might be more than just hallucinations is also brought into the discussion. The experimenters even speculated about a kind of collective mind emerging within the group, creating a semi-autonomous will that directed the observed phenomena.
Wow. Paulino's theory of what he calls parasites offers a darker and more negative perspective on some types of non-human entities that might be created or empowered by human thought and emotion.
Yeah, Eno proposes that these parasites are non-human entities that potentially feed on negative human emotions, like fear and hate.
Feeding on negativity.
He even speculates that they might be plasma-based in some way, and suggests a possible link between these entities and the underlying energies that fuel extremist political ideologies, which tend to generate vast amounts of negative emotional energy.
That's a chilling thought.
The potential connection between traditional concepts of ghosts and this egregorial model is also briefly touched upon.
Okay. The chapter titled Messages from Spirit and Alien Realms delves into the often perplexing phenomena of mediumship and purported communications from other intelligences.
The extensive mediumship of William Stainton Moses and his communications with a collective of spirit entities identifying themselves as doctor, teacher, rector, and imperator are discussed.
Satan Moses, right.
These communications reportedly included passive or automatic writing, the manipulation of physical objects like floating lights, and even electromagnetic effects. Moses himself described out-of-body experiences in what he called the spirit land, and encounters with Imperator and a group of 49 spirits all robed in white. Interestingly, he also reported being aware of imposter spirits attempting to deceive him.
Important detail.
Yeah. The school experiments, conducted in Norfolk, England, involved physical manifestations of objects, apports, like a pristine 1944 newspaper appearing in the room,
Upwards.
images appearing on sealed photographic film, and the appearance of responsive energy lights, glowing crystals that seem to pass through solid objects and participants.
Wow.
Peake notes the intriguing similarities between the phenomena observed by Stainton Moses and those documented during the school experiments. He ultimately emphasizes the apparent link between egregorials and human consciousness, suggesting that these entities might either impose themselves upon us or
be projected from us, fulfilling hopes and fears, maybe.
Exactly, yeah. That's the idea he explores.
Finally, in this section exploring different realms of communication, Peake addresses the modern phenomenon of extraterrestrials and abductions.
Right. The widespread phenomenon of reported UFO sightings and alien abduction experiences is examined. Peake points out the later trend in abduction reports involving the discovery of supposed alien implants.
The implants, yeah.
Which often turn out to be mundane, earthly objects. He draws a psychological parallel between this and the shamanic theme of ritualistic dismemberment and the implanting of spiritual objects.
Interesting parallel.
He explores the potential link between UFO abduction scenarios and traditional shamanic initiation rituals, particularly recalling the dismemberment motif and its presence in myths like that of Osiris and in Australian Aboriginal traditions involving snakes being placed in the initiate's brain.
Snakes in the brain, wow.
The experiences of Myron Dial, who reported encounters with both fairies and more unsettling macabre entities, are mentioned, as is the established connection between temporal lobe epilepsy and certain types of profound trance-like or visionary experiences.
Right, the TLE connection.
Which Mircea Eliade also noted in the context of shamanism. Encounters with entities resembling the stereotypical greys with their large, dark eyes in various contexts, including an out-of-body experience during a reported Tehran encounter with black-clad figures also possessing large black eyes, are also recounted.
Greys showing up again.
During the Tehran encounter, the individual also described visits to major cities and other environments displayed on a vast internal screen.
Like a slideshow in the mind.
Something like that.
Okay, this comprehensive overview of the diverse categories of non-human intelligences sets the stage for Peake's exploration of the potential mechanisms that might allow us to perceive or interact with these entities. He begins by focusing on the mysterious pineal gland.
Right, the pineal gland. Peake puts forward the really thought-provoking hypothesis that the pineal gland, often called our third eye, might actually serve as a kind of communication device,
Got an antenna.
enabling us to perceive what he terms ultra-terrestrials. He revisits the Aboriginal belief about mythical snakes creating crystalline implants in the brains of shamans during the dream time.
Those snakes again.
He then describes the physical structure of the pineal gland, its historical and esoteric significance across various cultures, and the scientific discoveries highlighting its light-sensitive cells, which are remarkably similar to those found in the human eye.
Like an internal eye.
He also mentions the potential light sensitivity of the fetal pineal gland. Peake cites a Taiwanese experiment that showed increased blood flow in the pineal gland during Chinese original quiet sitting meditation,
Oh, interesting.
suggesting its active involvement in higher states of consciousness. Ultimately, he proposes the pineal gland as a potential portal or interface between the kanoma, our perceived reality, and the pleroma, the realm of ultimate reality.
From the potential biological mechanisms, Peake moves on to discuss accessing the egregorial realm through what he calls the natural liminals, starting with the often unnerving experience of sleep paralysis.
Ugh, sleep paralysis. That strange state where you're consciously awake but unable to move. It's often associated with heightened sensory experiences and a sense of being in the presence of something else.
Yeah, the presence.
This can include strange beeping or humming noises and the distinct feeling of a malevolent presence nearby, often described historically as the old hag or the incubus succubus,
Right.
and in more modern times as the archetypal greys. Peake also mentions Paul Eno's perspective that sleep paralysis might be a state that can be manipulated by his parasites to generate fear and negative energy.
Manipulated.
Yeah.
Children are also presented as potentially having a more direct and unfiltered connection to these other realms.
Interestingly, yeah. The ancient Greeks believed that prepubescent children made ideal mediums. Peake notes children's natural adeptness at practices like scrying,
Gazing, right.
and the fact that childlike entities reportedly appeared during John Dee and Edward Kelly's sessions. He also revisits the link between Iris Owen's Philip experiment and the idea of a collective child ego state within the group, suggesting that this might open channels for the emergence of non-corporeal companions. Peake explores the possibility that the process of myelination in the developing adult brain, the insulation of nerve fibers, might inadvertently insulate us from a wider spectrum of reality by essentially closing some of our doors of perception.
So insulation cutting us off.
Potentially. He even speculates that the unique electrochemical communications in the less myelinated brains of prepubescent children might somehow leak into glial cells, facilitating a kind of cross-brain communication that allows for a different kind of perception.
Wow.
He uses the analogy of an adult neuronal network being like an analog telephone, whereas children's perception might be more akin to the pleromic internet, a much broader and more interconnected field of information.
Pleromic internet, I like that. The recurring imagery of owls in egregorial encounters across different times and contexts is particularly striking and demands closer attention.
Yes, the owl image seems to pop up in various accounts of encounters with the unusual, often predating the modern UFO abduction phenomenon.
Before UFOs became a big thing.
Exactly. Examples include Whitley Strieber's vivid hypnagogic images of owls, a fascinating 1926 case of a young boy seeing distinctly owl-like entities with light bulb-shaped heads and slit-like eyes,
Weirdly specific.
and Carol's unsettling owl dream that was accompanied by buzzing sounds, bodily vibrations, and the familiar paralysis of sleep.
The whole package.
Johnny Mack, the renowned Harvard psychiatrist who studied abduction experiences, also documented a case of a child reporting being taken by scary owls.
Scary owls, wow.
Peake draws intriguing parallels between these modern accounts and ancient imagery, such as the 10,000-year-old cave paintings at Hoshangabad in India and the enigmatic Ain Ghazal statues found in Jordan.
Right, those statues.
He even suggests a possible connection between this owl imagery and very ancient cave art, such as the famous sorcerer figure in the Trois Frères caves in France. He also touches on the possibility of a link between childhood and old-age egregorial encounters, perhaps involving phenomena like Charles Bonnet syndrome in children, which can cause visual hallucinations.
Peake also highlights the recurring theme of entities dwelling underground in geographically diverse cultures.
Yeah, across seemingly unrelated cultures, like those in Brazil and the Arabian Peninsula, there are persistent reports of non-human entities inhabiting subterranean realms.
Underground beings.
Conversely, there are also numerous accounts of shamans interacting with entities perceived to reside in the sky or celestial regions, and recurring stories of mysterious women who appear and guide people to special herbs or knowledge.
The mysterious power of psychoactive substances like ayahuasca and DMT as potential conduits to alternative realities is then explored in depth.
Oh, yeah. The seemingly innate knowledge held by indigenous cultures regarding the complex combinations of plants needed to create ayahuasca is a profound mystery in itself.
How did they figure that out?
Exactly. The prevalence of what are often described as insectoid features in the entities encountered during DMT experiences is a recurring and striking theme.
Insectoids, yeah.
Peake also mentions the discovery of bufotenin, another psychoactive compound, in jojoba snuff, and the isolation of various alkaloids from these plants. He recounts several vivid and diverse personal encounters during DMT experiences, ranging from Bilton's frightening encounter with a demonic entity to Michael Harner's profound experience involving reptilian creatures who claim to have seeded life on Earth.
Wow, big claims.
And Jeremy Narby's intense interaction with giant boa constrictors that seem to communicate knowledge directly to him. Terence McKenna famously described encountering machine-like delves during his DMT experiences and the overwhelming feeling of intruding upon a vast cosmic gathering.
The McKenna Ills.
Loop's experiences with a wide array of entities during high doses of DMT led him to the discovery of the West African Hausa god of death, Azrael, depicted with many eyes, and the Tibetan deity Za, or Zaz, visualized with 1,000 eyes on a snake-like body guarding the liminal world.
So many different entities
A
reported.
huge variety.
Finally, in this chapter focusing on accessing these other realms, the significance of darkness and enclosed spaces like caves is revisited.
Right, the caves again. The consistent use of deep, unlit caves for Upper Paleolithic cave art, the Prophet Muhammad's initial revelatory visitations in a dark cave, and the locations of the famous apparitions at Lourdes and Fatima.
All point to something.
All point to the potential importance of darkness and enclosed spaces in facilitating these kinds of encounters. Peake connects this to the Aboriginal concept of the rainbow snake, often associated with creation and hidden knowledge, and the broader idea that profound secrets might reside within the inner sanctum of man's own mind.
Okay, this rich exploration of historical accounts, cultural beliefs, and altered states leads Peake to his final section, egregorial science, where he attempts to find potential scientific frameworks for understanding these seemingly paranormal phenomena.
Right, trying to bridge the gap. He begins by addressing the inherent limitations of the purely materialist reductionist view of consciousness, referencing David Chalmers' well-known hard problem of consciousness.
The hard problem, yeah.
The fundamental mystery of how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. He then delves into the potential role of quantum physics and the observer effect, particularly the Copenhagen interpretation, which suggests that observation plays a crucial role in collapsing quantum possibilities into definite states. He also mentions John Wheeler's profound idea that no elementary phenomenon is a phenomenon until it is a registered observed phenomenon, and Einstein's perspective that time and space are modes by which we think and not conditions by which we live.
Mind-bending stuff.
It's the idea that our act of observing might be fundamentally intertwined with the very creation of what we perceive as reality.
The increasingly discussed possibility that our perceived reality might be a form of computer simulation is also considered within this scientific framework.
Peake raises the intriguing hypothesis that the Kenoma, the world we experience, might actually be a sophisticated computer simulation.
The simulation hypothesis.
Suggesting that everything we perceive is essentially a digital reality creation. He cites Craig Hogan's theory of a holographic universe, a kind of four-dimensional video display, and the controversial detection of potential pixelation at the quantum level by the GEO 600 gravitational wave detector as a potential, albeit debated, piece of evidence for this idea.
Pixels in reality. Wow. He then explores the role of DNA from a purely informational perspective.
Yeah, DNA is examined not just as a biological molecule, but as a highly efficient storage medium for information, drawing parallels with the way data is stored in computers.
DNA as hard drive.
Kind of. Peake mentions George Church's groundbreaking work in encoding an entire book and images into DNA, and the broader information-based view of life championed by thinkers like Paul Davies, which suggests that information might be a fundamental aspect of reality, just as energy and matter are.
Information as fundamental. The fascinating hypothesis of coherent light within the brain and its potential connection to a universal information field is also examined.
Peake presents the hypothesis that coherent light, potentially generated by microtubules within brain neurons, a theory proposed by Hirano and Hirai, might be able to access what's often called the Akashic record.
The Akashic record, right.
A kind of universal library of all events and knowledge, sometimes linked to the zero-point energy field, or Qi. This accessed information could then be processed by the brain to create holographic-like experiences, further supporting the idea that our perceived reality is ultimately a construct of our own minds.
Peake also considers the role of neurotransmitters and even endogenously produced DMT within the brain.
The fundamental role of neurotransmitters in facilitating synaptic communication within the brain is briefly explained, leading into Barrett's metatonin hypothesis.
Melatonin.
This hypothesis proposes that endogenous DMT, which is biosynthesized in the pineal gland from tryptamine by the IMNT enzyme, might play a crucial role in creating new neural pathways and consciousness feedback loops, potentially even being linked to the strange state of sleep paralysis we discussed earlier.
Connecting back to sleep paralysis. Finally, Peake delves into the mind-bending nature of matter itself at the subatomic level.
The current scientific understanding of matter as being composed of point particles, entities with no physical extension in space existing within invisible force fields mediated by elusive virtual carrier particles, is discussed.
Mostly empty space and fields.
Right. The profound mystery of space itself, often thought of as empty yet somehow containing these fields, and the strange role of the observer in seemingly bringing subatomic particles into existence through the act of measurement, are highlighted.
The observer effect again.
Peake touches on the idea that what we consider reality might be mediated by things that don't literally exist in space or time as we understand them, such as photons and the timeless nature of electromagnetic fields. He also mentions Einstein's theory of relativity and the seemingly paradoxical observer-dependent speed of light.
Right.
And the growing interconnectedness of the concepts of it, physical reality, and bit, information field. The historical debunking of the lumniferous ether as a necessary physical medium for light to travel through space further supports the idea that reality might not be based on a tangible mechanical foundation.
No ether needed.
Ultimately, he points to John Wheeler's view that physical reality might be fundamentally composed of pure information.
Wow. So, as we reach the conclusion of this deep dive into Anthony Peake's The Hidden Universe, what are the key themes and takeaways that have emerged from his extensive exploration?
Okay, so to try and put it all together, we've journeyed through a vast landscape of historical and cultural accounts of non-human intelligences, right?
Absolutely.
Seeing how these reports manifest across different categories, from the intentionally evoked entities of the occult and the religiously significant figures, to those seemingly born from the power of collective thought. And those encountered in the altered states of consciousness explored by shamans and psychonauts. We've also examined potential portals to these realms, both the natural liminal states of consciousness and the intriguing possibility of the pineal gland acting as a biological antenna.
Right. The pineal?
As well as the profound and often transformative experiences facilitated by entheogens. And finally, we've dipped our toes into the mind-bending implications of quantum physics and information theory, which offer radical new perspectives on the very fabric of reality itself.
Peake's work really suggests that what we often take for granted as our singular, objective, consensual reality might actually be just one of many overlapping realities.
Yeah.
And perhaps all of these different layers or perspectives hold their own form of validity or realness.
And while many of the ideas we've discussed are admittedly speculative, they push the boundaries of conventional understanding.
For sure.
They are increasingly informed by a developing scientific perspective that suggests consciousness might play a far more fundamental role in the universe than previously imagined, with matter itself potentially being a manifestation of underlying information.
So for you, our listener, we leave you with this final provocative thought. If the universe we perceive could, in fact, be akin to an incredibly sophisticated virtual reality simulation, what profound implications does that have for the very nature of the information that constitutes reality? And could our potential for interaction with other aspects of this vast information field include the very entities, the non-human intelligences that we've explored in such detail today?
Perhaps this deep dive has only scratched the surface of your own ongoing investigation into these enduring and deeply fascinating mysteries.